All right. We are recording. This is podcast number 4, and we are here today with Pat Lynch, and he's going to give us a kind of day in the life, a breakdown. But he has been a client of mine, I believe, since early 2018. And you've got a lot going on. We're also recording this via Zoom. Pat is in Southern California and I am in Northern California, but we are also in the midst of the COVID situation. So I'm going to let Pat give us a little bit of intro about him and maybe kind of dive into a little bit of how you got into triathlon, your kind of sporting background too. So go for it.
Yeah. Well, I think we started working together, a couple years ago. And up to that point, I had a strong athletic background in the sense that growing up, I played really highly competitive soccer, really made a decision kind of toward the end of my high school days that I wanted to really focus my time on surfing. And for the most part, passed on probably what would have ended up being some sort of scholarship position with soccer in college, and pursued surfing. It was my passion. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in Oceanside here in San Diego where I live. And surfing was just like the most attractive thing in the world to me. And I loved doing sports I probably was more bent toward doing sports that were singularly focused. Soccer was a team sport, but I loved the alone time. I loved the challenge of surfing. And then in my early days out of high school, I think literally 2 days after I graduated, I flew to Brazil, surfed on a U.S. team, represented the United States there. I was in Brazil for like a month. Wow. And came home, and over there was awesome. We got to do some great cultural exchange things, help out kids that were on the street. And so there was just purpose behind what we were doing as well. So it wasn't just passion, but there was purpose behind it.
Awesome.
And found myself at 19, 20 years old. I was the national champion of my age division in the United States. And by the time I was 21, 22, I had moved into the professional ranks of surfing. And this is back, and trust me, this is back in the day. I'm 46 now. So I had moved into the professional ranks of surfing and was ranked 16th in the world, and walked away from surfing in a really bizarre set of circumstances that I won't get into the details of, for the sake of this conversation, but very abruptly walked away from surfing. And then went into this kind of middle part of my life where my wife, who we started dating in high school, and I got married at 24, 25, started having kids a year after, had our first daughter. And then over life, there's this gap, kind of these middle years where in my 30s, I got really out of shape, mentally and emotionally, probably wasn't in the best place, struggled with some things. And, in the midst of that, my wife and I had some more kids. About 2 years ago, I had wanted to do triathlon. And so I started kind of dabbling in it a couple years ago. And today, currently, my wife and I have 7 daughters. So we have a 21-year-old all the way down to a almost 1-year-old.
Wow, yeah.
She'll turn 1 this month. So we have the full spectrum. And that's, yes, 100%. You heard me right. All girls, 7 girls. So we live in San Diego still, and it's a crazy life with all those girls. I also am the point leader of a good sized organization of a church here in San Marcos, where I live in San Diego County. And so I'm the senior pastor there. And so I just got a lot going on. Yeah. And it's fun. I wouldn't change it for anything, but that's who I am in a nutshell: a dad, a husband, a leader, and pastor. And all around, I think I'm a good guy, but you probably have to ask my wife and my daughters what they say.
Well, so far, I mean, obviously we've continued to work together. I think you're a great guy, but the reason why I also wanted to interview Pat and have him on the podcast today was because of how how much in his life he has going on and how he can still manage and actually be really incredibly successful at triathlon, which in endurance racing takes a lot of your time. And so I like give you kudos for that, because you have a lot going on and you're still managing it all and you're being successful in it all. So I think that is, you know, probably something that a lot of people want to grasp. You know, there's usually something slipping through the cracks. So I think that is really impressive. And so I guess we'll kind of want to jump back a little bit. So when we first started working together, I always like to ask my interviewees is why did you reach out to me, and what were your goals at that time, or what were you struggling with nutritionally?
Yeah. So first of all, props to Matt Dixon and those guys. They had a podcast at Purple Patch.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of Purple Patch. I was like, this is the weirdest name. What does this mean? And then Matt later on has gone on to describe, and he shares what it means. But I really was intrigued, and I was struggling nutritionally, and he had a podcast with you on it one day. And my struggle is that I have, which you and I have had to really work through. I have a genetic mutation, a deficiency that doesn't allow me to eat. I'll just say I can't eat like most other people, especially in endurance sports. You know, I can't eat, number one in life, I can't eat whatever I want. I have a very limited food selection.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, if you add in endurance sports with how much fueling needs to happen. So I was in a place of nutritionally where I had come from a background. So there's a caveat to this. I had come from a background where I didn't really grow up seeing healthy choices being made food wise, but I was the athletic one. So what ended up happening was I for the most part, developed an eating disorder when I was younger. And I was highly functional athletically, but I believe now, looking back, I was highly deficient and probably could have performed better. My performance levels probably would have been much higher. But what happened is when I started doing triathlon, all of this stuff all of a sudden comes to the surface because you're depleting yourself. And so I remember when I heard you on that podcast, I just knew in my gut, like, I have to change something. One of the key things that was happening is I was doing all of my training and all of my fueling with absolutely zero carbohydrates.
Oh, wow,
I didn't eat any carbs. And so I was consuming very slim selection of food and high protein. And it was causing some issues in my body. And it was obviously causing issues performance wise. And so I just, in hearing you, and I loved both you and Matt's approach in your conversation. And so it was one of those, it seemed compulsive, but it was something that was brewing in me for a while, and something resonated. And I thought, because of my busy life, that spoke to me. And there was this immediate level of trust that I almost had, that I know if I reach out to Kyla, because she's working with Matt, she's going to understand my busy lifestyle, but I also think nutritionally she's going to be able to help me. And so I took a stab at it, and I reached out to you and booked a session, and we chatted, and you've put up with me ever since.
You've been great. You've been great, Pat. So with the kind of nutrition stuff too, with kind of going from that world of potentially like having a disordered eating or an eating disorder, and then getting into endurance sports and being maybe underfueled or low micronutrients or macronutrients, calories, all of those things. Did you have any kind of health issues occur? Any fractures, anything like that go on with you when you kind of got into that? Or
Yeah, so like one of the biggest, I think, things that affected me. So here's the fascinating thing with the disorder with eating. It really, for me, it derives first in the mind.
Yeah.
So there was something in my mind and an image, and then it goes into how I feel. So how do I feel when I eat? And so on one hand, when I was really athletic when I was younger, it impacted me because I was putting out a lot of work, effort. So it would make me sick. I would deal with these massive migraines, and It would just take me out for like 48 hours, and
Yeah.
it was done. And
Mm-hmm.
so I remember that. And then during kind of those middle years, that same disorder that keeps me from eating enough food,
Mm-hmm.
if you flip that over mentally, I consumed too much food.
Mm-hmm.
So either way, it has this disorder for me can either manifest itself in not enough intake or way too much focus and too much intake.
Mm-hmm.
Because either way is control.
Yeah.
I'm controlling so I'm cutting back, or I'm controlling and I'm over consuming.
Mm-hmm.
So I was 50 pounds heavier than I am now. I was in the worst shape ever. And that's where I had to really begin
Mm-hmm.
and get back in shape. But I wasn't utilizing, you and I hadn't developed any sort of relationship in terms of nutrition. And so I was finding those things start to creep back up again.
Mm-hmm.
My body was shutting down. I was dealing with, so anyone who's listening to this that's done any triathlon, like muscle cramping, sleep was
Yeah.
destroyed, which we
Mm-hmm.
all know we need that rest, and migraines were setting in. I was having horrible bouts with seasons of migraines.
Wow. Yeah.
And so there was just a lot of these manifestations. And then I have to say, beyond physical manifestations, the mental and emotional manifestations began to creep back in.
Mm-hmm.
And I just knew in my 40s now, I think I had gained enough wisdom to know uh, I need the accountability and the wisdom and the expertise of somebody that this is their passion,
Mm-hmm.
and I can trust them with those sensitive things, and I can allow them to speak into. And
Mm-hmm.
so when she gives me, hey, this is how many macronutrients you need to be eating, and I look at it and go, you've got to be kidding me. That's because for me, that mentally and emotionally meant something else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's a huge amount of impact. And then, not to mention, it goes without saying, and you can probably imagine, that has a massive impact on your surroundings, your relational environment.
Mm-hmm.
So my ability to be a dad to my 7 daughters in a really healthy, functional way, husband, a leader,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm called upon a lot, and I wasn't performing in life to the best of my ability, and I felt like I was failing. And so there's a lot of manifestation that happens. But I felt like for me, I had to look at it as the full spectrum. It wasn't, I'm dealing with migraines. It
Yeah.
was, here's the full spectrum of life, because this isn't just about triathlon, it's about life.
Right.
And this is how this is impacting me across the board in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And so with the kind of nutrition change you mentioned,
Yeah.
me giving you those macros, that tends to be a common theme that I've noticed with a lot of my clients, where I put together the plan for them and they're like, oh my gosh, like either this is a lot of vegetables, or I have to consume this many grams of carbs, or I have to eat this much
Yeah.
before I go train. Like what?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people had no idea, but
Yeah.
and so it's something that can be worked into slowly too over a period of time. But what did you notice in terms of like your performance, energy, like any of that stuff when you started adjusting your nutrition? What did you notice change?
Yeah, I think number 100% first thing that I noticed was I specifically remember doing my run workouts and feeling like every time I had to do these run workouts, I was running with like lead balloons attached to my ankles, and I just didn't have as much, energy as I needed. I just felt like I didn't have the sustaining power
Right.
for what I needed to be able to perform. And when I first got your breakdown, I looked at it and I said all those things. I'm like, she wants me to eat what before I go do what? Like, because I was training basically fasted.
Yeah.
Every single workout. Because I didn't know how my stomach was going to react, and I didn't like feeling full when I worked out, and all these crazy like psychosis things
Yeah.
that go on.
Totally.
So yeah, I distinctly remember I had a run workout. I talked to you. You sent me the first time you broke everything down. I ate carbohydrates for the first time and I had a workout, and I did this workout, and it was like someone had turned on a light switch in my body. And I was like, I got 3/4 way through the workout and I have all this energy. I don't know what to do. And my legs didn't feel like I was dragging them through cement. And not to mention, after the fact, I felt amazing. I didn't feel like super lethargic, and I felt like I had some clarity. But it was a shock, Kyla. I mean, I I remember talking to you and I said, I don't know if I can eat all this food.
Yes.
and you said, hey, just take it slow. If you have to push some carbs to the next day, this long term, and you really walked me through it. But yeah, it was really shocking for me, because I'll tell you this, when I saw from a health perspective, when I saw what a healthy nutritional plan looked like for what I was doing, and I compared it to what I had been doing, it wasn't even in the same universe.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't even know what to do. And yeah, carbohydrates have become like my very best friend.
Awesome.
I love them now.
Yes. Good. Yeah. I know there's a lot of popular diet trends and stuff, and specifically to like keto, and sometimes depending on how people follow paleo, can be very low carb, and doing that for the endurance athlete can be pretty detrimental. And so we see that, repeated again and again in the research, is that every time the athlete who's consuming the carbs performs better, lasts longer, all of that stuff. So I'm glad we were able to fix that there.
So am I.
Yes. And I think that's a very common theme too, because I mean, when you do, or when I even do the calculations too, sometimes, these are based off of body weight and activity level and things like that, and calculating the carbohydrate requirements for the individual. I'm looking at them too, and I'm like, yeah, that's a lot. That is a lot of carbs, and I get it. And I have tried to get in my share of carbs too before my training sessions, and it's and so always trying to find those ways to minimize that impact on the gut, depending on whether you're running versus cycling and swimming and all that stuff. But so what are your kind of favorite go-to during training fueling sources that you use right now?
Man, so you and I have really had to, so this is the other thing. When I contacted you, I was like 4 weeks out of Oceanside 70.3.
Right.
And you were like, okay, crash course, we got to get this guy. And so one of the biggest things that you and I've had to work on is, what am I using for fueling? And so I think first and foremost, the best thing that you helped with was the difference between my nutrition and my fueling. And these two separate compartmentalized, I had to compartmentalize these things. It helped me mentally and emotionally, but it also helped me understand what my body needed. So you and I've had to work really hard, because of my very limited really ability to eat pretty much anything while I train, I feel like. So for me, I think there's a few favorites that I've run into. Bananas, believe it or not, I've settled into. Bananas probably have the least amount of impact on me in terms of GI distress. Excellent. I can handle them well. I can mash them up. And so for me, if I mash up a banana, I put some probably a smidge of protein and something that's a little fatty, and then maple syrup. That to me is like the best thing that I could use, because I'm trying to keep everything as clean and as pure as possible. And I find for me that works really well. I use sweet potatoes sometimes. But it depends on if I'm racing or if I'm training. So if I have to get off the bike and run really hard, I won't use a lot of sweet potatoes. But if I'm training and I need the fuel, then I can use those.
That's awesome. For those of you guys listening and watching, Pat obviously didn't tolerate a lot of the kind of sports products, the gels and things like that, which is not super uncommon, but that we were able to figure out kind of what things worked for Pat, and he mixes up his own stuff. And do you Cuisinart it or blend it up, or how do you Mix
Old
it up.
school. I put it in a bowl.
Whisk.
So yeah, and I do, and I get a fork and I
Yeah.
mash the potatoes up, and then I start adding things. And
Yeah.
the team that I train with, we were at a team house before La Quinta 70.3, and they're watching me mix this stuff. They're all grabbing all their pre-packaged gels and
Yes.
everything, and I'm in the kitchen, like, they're like, "What are you doing?" And I, explain it to them, and they're going, "You've got to be kidding me!" And
Yeah.
I put them in reusable tubes and take those tubes with me, and
Yeah. That's
race and
awesome.
eat my food out of a tube.
Exactly. Yeah. Pureed food, baby food,
Yeah,
basically. Yeah.
pretty much. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's perfect. And so kind of solved that issue there for you with the intrafueling stuff. And we've evolved, I think, too, over the years working together. We've played with different nut butters. We've played
Yeah,
with, like you said, different carb sources, maple syrup versus sweet potatoes. We've done
yeah,
some different types of protein powders and things like that as well to kind of mix it up and see what works best for you, and also different ratios. So depending on typically like the intensity, like Pat was saying, or what's going on, we might play around with like the protein fat to carb ratio and things like that for
mhm,
some of Pat's stuff as well.
yeah.
Um, and then let's see, what is your kind of go-to pre-training fuel source right now?
Man, I'm kind of a habitual person. I don't know if, like, as triathletes we get into this like super focused and intense. I pretty much routinely will get up every single morning. I train 6 days a week. Um, Even now, currently in COVID, I'm still training 6 days a week, and I'll utilize banana, sunflower butter,
Mm,
because I think nut butters in general are really good sources
mm-hmm.
of fat,
Yeah.
and they're great. For me, sunflower butter is better because um, it's lower in phytic acid, which
Mm-hmm.
upsets my stomach
Mm-hmm.
and causes inflammation for me. So that, and then if I have a really long training session, I'll add in the same thing. I'll add in some maple syrup,
Yeah.
and then I can never remember the name, like the carb powder.
Oh, the highly branched cyclic dextrin powder.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you gotta have all, like, the degrees and stuff that you have to be able to say it. It's my special white carb powder. I
Yeah.
tell my kids, that stuff is amazing. It has
Yeah.
no flavor. It mixes into anything really, really well.
Yeah.
I utilize that in training. I utilize that in racing.
Yeah.
So if I really need to take in a lot of carbs, my very favorite, if I've taken a lot of carbs before I train, if I have a long session, is banana, the white carb powder, some sunflower butter, and maple syrup. And it's like
Yeah.
super, super sweet, and I feel like
Yeah.
I'm cheating, and it's amazing. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that the cyclic dextrin powder, I'll send it to the clients in emails, and I just call it HBCD because it's got that long name.
yeah,
But a lot of other companies too, they have like renamed it or marketed it as cluster dextrin, which I think is a little bit easier to remember or say. But yeah, that
yeah,
stuff can be really helpful, like you're saying, because it's not
yeah,
flavored, and you can kind of just scoop and be in control of what your needs are depending on what the training output or intensity is going to be.
yeah.
Um, and then let's see, so we are in the midst of COVID. So
Uh-huh.
why don't you tell us a little bit about your kind of your obviously pre-COVID, what were your racing plans? What did you have on the calendar? And how has that changed now that COVID's happened?
Yeah. Yeah, with just my life, just, I think, kids and work and everything going on, I basically have worked out. I do 2 half Ironmans a year. I live in North County, San Diego. I grew up in Oceanside, so Oceanside was the first race I ever did 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and so that's always on my schedule. And also, this is considered local for me, is out in Palm Springs, La Quinta. There's a
Mhm.
70.3 that is an awesome race. It's a super fun race. It's a beautiful environment. So those are the 2 races that I do, and those pretty much I've kept on the schedule. I raced La Quinta. That race is in early December, like the first week of December, and then we went through the holidays, and then after the first of the year, we started hearing murmurings of this coronavirus, and then Oceanside was the first weekend of April,
Mm-hmm.
And we all of a sudden were sent into quarantine, into lockdown, and that race got postponed. And so right now, I still am signed up to race Oceanside. I think they've pushed it out until October.
Mm-hmm.
We have to wait and see, obviously, to see what happens with all this. But I think, moving, that's really how I was focusing on my racing with my schedule right now. I think moving forward, I know you and I had talked. I actually I'm in a season of life right now, just, understanding that there's some things that are more important than triathlon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is hard. Anyone who's watching or listening to this that really has taken to the sport, it's hard to, you get so, for me, I'll speak for myself, it's so focused on the performance and on the challenge and on the achievements and on the growth. And you can't lose sight, though, that it's just a part of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so moving forward, you and I had already talked that Oceanside is probably going to be my last race for a while,
Mm-hmm.
only because of personal reasons.
Yeah.
And so at most, I'll probably do 170.3 a year. I'm working with people that are just friends that are getting into triathlon that I might show up and do a sprint or something like that. I'm just not a fan of those short races anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just a lot. I think there's just a lot of uncertainty that we're all in. And so
Yeah.
I want to keep racing. I feel like, though, that a lot like just endurance sports, looking at life, it's much more of a long-term thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 46. I have some goals and some plans in triathlon that I'd love to hit kind of by 50.
Yeah.
And I'm like right there. You and I had been really working on getting me to the 70.3 World Championships.
Mm-hmm.
And I missed that by 1:32 seconds.
Yeah.
Like every triathlete, knows, like, I know 1:32 seconds I missed going to the Worlds this last December. But, and who's to know, like, maybe there was a bigger picture and reason why I missed that and all that. But I feel like I'm knocking on the door. And, I got to keep putting in the work. I'm always going to train.
Yeah.
But just racing takes a lot. The ramp up to racing and that peak into racing takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And a lot of mental capacity. So I'll buckle down and I'll do Oceanside in October, and then I'll probably reevaluate and hopefully keep at least one race a year. If I do, it'll be Oceanside, probably keep it on the calendar.
Yeah. And to kind of just like circle back and summarize right there. So you've been in triathlon for 2 years-ish, right?
2 years.
And you got 1:32 seconds away from going to Worlds. Like,
yeah,
that's pretty darn impressive. So, yeah, that is awesome. So
yeah.
With kind of the change in goals and the COVID stuff going on, what is your what does a day in the life of Pat Lynch look like right now with training and being in shelter in place?
Yeah. Well, first, I think the mindset shift had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was, I had to make a decision. How do I, to know how I was going to deal with my day in and day out, I had to make a decision on what I wanted to look like walking out of this.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to decide, do I want to sustain or do I want to come out stronger?
Yeah.
And I guess there was a first option is just quit.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of athletes around me that they've just said, hey, this is a good time to quit. And they just quit training and they haven't done anything.
Right.
And I just made the decision. I am not a maintainer. I am horrible at maintaining. I'm a builder, and I just made the decision. Okay, this is a great opportunity for me to get stronger on the key points that are keeping me from performing at the level that I want.
Yeah.
So a day in the life for me is still pretty normal, to be honest with you. I get up in the morning. The one thing that's changed is I'm not up at 5 a.m. any longer training. I sleep in a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I get up in the morning, and I think part of the shift for me in incorporating life and triathlon, this sounds really strange maybe, but that has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So simple things like I get up in the morning and I make my wife a cup of coffee, with all of her special stuff in it. and I bring it up to her, and then I'll go and I'll train. And pretty much my day starts right there. After training, I'm one thing to the next. I'm in meetings. I'm preparing for, Sunday, which Sunday doesn't stop as a pastor.
Yeah.
I'm communicating 3 different times on Sunday, 3 different services to, a couple thousand people. And so just focused on that. Time with my kids is enormous. So I think spending time with them is always important. And there's 7 of them, and they're in such different seasons. So time looks different.
Yeah.
So some of them joining me in sport, some of them just joining me on the couch, and they just want to snuggle up with daddy, which is like a dad of daughters is just like the coolest thing ever. We've moved to my wife built a she shed. She calls it a she shed. It's an 11-person tent.
Oh my
that
God.
she put, I'm not joking. She put in our backyard.
That's awesome.
And she's got plants hanging inside of it, and
cool.
fairy lights, and she's got a futon mattress and big fluffy pillows. And so sometimes it's just disappearing out there, and letting my wife disappear and me spending time with the kids, or her and I disappearing and shutting the door to the house and saying, we need some mom and dad time. As husband and wife. But life looks, I'm actually, I would say I'm happy that this time of lockdown happened, because I think what it's done for me, and I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with this, although it's hard, like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of difficult things, but what it's done is it's helped to realign and refocus probably the things that we really needed to focus on. It's given me more time, as it's given you, or gives other people more time to really do things. And we have time we have margin. That's really the word. All of a sudden it gave us margin again. Because I know in Southern California, I know where you're at, like, it is always going nonstop. That's just the culture. So it just gave us this margin back. So, so I try to maintain training 6 days a week. I still work with my coach, Dea, who she trains and works out of our local Play Tri store here in Oceanside. And those guys have been a huge help. And so she gives me my weekly stuff on Training Peaks, and
awesome.
I try to just keep my routines and rhythms kind of the same, because I want to be stronger. That's the key. I had to make the decision. Do you want to be stronger when you come out of this? And I wanted to be stronger.
So in terms of like your training, have you shifted more towards like strength-based stuff, like shorter stuff, or what is that training looking like for you? So what we did is we backed off the training, one, from just body, I'm heading closer to 50. So I'm competing at 70.3, but we needed to back the training off to more about Olympic distance, so that my body just didn't break down trying to train from now to October for a race. So everything kind of shortened up a little bit. So the intensity dialed up a bit, which is good, because for me, one of the things that does is it keeps the endurance tank, keeps that fitness tank there, but it starts adding some speed and some of that intensity. So that's what I need in order for me to achieve what I want. And then definitely the swimming aspects got taken out. So we started to incorporate a lot of strength things that are keeping at least the strength of swimming, and then strength in general. So I added some HIIT workouts that my wife and I will do together every once in a while, and that's cool for us to do. And so I'll do HIIT workouts. Then I have very specific strength workouts, and I really try to focus on the longevity game as opposed to kind of the short term. And so adaptation is huge. Like, how is my body adapting to all that? So the training within that 6-day window a week of training, it has shifted a bit, and it's backed off in terms of overall hours. Right. So I may not be training 2 to 4 hours a day, but I'm still getting really important key work in, I guess is what I would say. Awesome. That's kind of a similar thing I've heard from a lot of athletes that I've been checking in with, which I think is a smart approach too, because we don't really know what's going to happen if, when these races are going to start. So, yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think it's good to see too, the kind of you're seeing the silver lining and like keeping you motivated too, to kind of keep going and have that goal in mind. Cause like you're saying, I think a lot of people during this time saw it as an opportunity to just kind of throw their hands up in the air and just like wait and see what's going to happen and think they can take a little vacation. And now this vacation is turning into like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Like we don't know how many months we're going to be vacationing from sport. And so, let that fitness just drop away, or do we want to kind of either maintain it or kind of even improve during this time? So I think it's good to kind of get a grasp at that and see kind of what's going on. And so let's see, so we're getting close on time here. So in terms of kind of finishing this up, do you have any kind of send off notes to help keep people inspired, motivated, or just like keep going on with, during COVID and training? Any thoughts or suggestions to people out there listening and watching?
Gosh, I think the biggest thing for me is really having to shift. So I'll break this out. For sport, inspiring is it can't be about the races.
Yes. Agreed.
Okay. So I want to encourage you. Most people are probably suffering mentally because the race, whatever was in front of them, is gone.
Yeah.
You have an opportunity. What I would tell people right now is you have an opportunity to grab a hold of the thing inside of you that compelled you at day one to even pursue that first race that you did. There is a why somewhere deep inside of every single one of us. Like, why is it that Kyla chose to do what she does? Why is it that I decided to take on doing triathlon with all the stuff going on in my life? There is a why somewhere in your heart and in the environment that you're living in. And I think I would encourage people, find maybe this time period you needed a break. Maybe it was, training was becoming mundane and you weren't liking triathlon, or you weren't liking certain aspects of it. You may need to reconnect with that why again. Why was it that you did that? What victory were you looking for? What was the thing that you were trying to prove? What was the thing that resonated deep inside of you that would drive you to do something like this? And that for me was something that was powerful, because about a month after all this started, I really found myself reconnecting with my why again. Like, this is why. And I got to tell you, Kyla, it had nothing to do with the next race.
Yeah. Awesome.
It had zero to do with it. It had to do with the fact that I want to be the highest performing, best Pat possible for anybody that comes in contact with me. If it's a stranger on the street, or it's one of my children, or if it's someone that calls me friend, I want to be able to perform at my highest ability in the toughest, most difficult situation, so that I can be the best me for myself and for my family and for my friends. But that's attached to a why. And I think a lot of us have lost that. I think a lot of us just get so caught up in everything going on. We lose this moment, this like very split second where something impacted us and we went, I'm going to go do this race. And we start this journey. And I would just highly encourage people, take time, like shut this off when you're done, and go find time, take an hour and sit by yourself and turn everything off and ask yourself the question, what is it? What is buried deep inside of me that burns in me, that makes me want to do this, and reconnect with that thing, because that is more important than the next race. So
yeah, I love that. I think that's awesome. And that actually kind of ties in. It's not, well, by the time people hear this, it will be out. But our second podcast that we did is with a mental performance coach, and she's in the sports psychology world. And I think that's something we've talked about and talked about together over our years, working with one another. But she talks about that too, and finding that why. And actually I think she sent me some handouts that I shared with that as well, for people to help kind of figure it out. But what you're saying too is it really it resonates, because a lot of people, their why might be at first quickly come to their mind something that is kind of somewhat almost shallow, like I want to win the race. But why do you want to win the race, right? And so you start to go deeper with that, and once you kind of find that and realize that, I think it is kind of an eye opener as to like how you kind of approach however long this COVID situation is going to be. Right. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think I love that you shared that. And yeah, that's awesome. And one of the other from our actually first podcast, I asked Flick the same question, and she goes, do you think the pros are taking all this time off? She's like, no, they're training harder than ever. And as soon as this lifts, they're going to be busting at the gates trying to get out there.
Right.
So I mean, depending on what your motivator is, if it's, keeping up with the pros, or, if you are a pro, I think that it's cool to hear, everyone's different whys. Right. And, yeah, I love that. So where can people find you, follow along with your story? What's the best places for people to reach out to you?
Yeah. Probably most active on, for me, social media, personally. So whether it's Facebook or Instagram, you can find me at Pat Lynch Vox. So it's just my first name, last name, Pat Lynch, and then VOX, on Instagram. Of course, I'm on Facebook because that's where all of our grandparents see our children. And then, for our church, if you want to see a little bit more of kind of this other side of me, you can always find anything that I do. I have platforms that I speak on. Some of it's motivational, at themovement.org, which is our website, and then at the Movement Church on our Instagram.
Awesome.
So those are really the two main easiest ways to connect with me. And I do a lot of communication through Instagram. So probably that would be like the main one. But yeah,
awesome.
If someone wanted to, that was the easiest way to connect.
Perfect. Well, we will include all that too in our show notes for those of you guys who are watching on YouTube, and I believe in iTunes, we can include that, I think, in the notes section as well. So check Pat out, follow him, follow his journey, keep motivated. Pat shares tons of great motivational content. I love it. I love every time we get to check in. He inspires me too. That's what I love about my clients. So check him out, and thank you guys for watching and viewing, and let us know what you guys thought about the podcast in the comments. And until next time. All right. Take care, Pat.
Bye. Thank you.